Should we open? Should
okay.
we?
I just hit record. Does it show that it's recording now? Should be up top left. Should say recording, little red light.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we're recording. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so then Lynn, you can go through the disclaimer first.
Okay, I'll do the English and then
the English, and then Jacqueline's doing the French, and then you can dive right in.
Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. So they're all being admitted now.
Okay.
There.
Let's see if I can do this actually full screen. Whoa. Uh-oh.
I can't see the English.
No, neither can I. Now I'm there. We go.
It's there somewhere.
We're gonna do it this way now. It's a little bit smaller, but at least we can manipulate it.
Is the French one? Does it end with what we're seeing? Oh, okay, there we go. I couldn't see the bottom line.
Sorry, yeah. Can you see both the top and the bottom now?
Now I can.
Okay, I'll leave it like that.
And maybe just for the folks who have joined us, we're just going to kick off in a moment, but welcome, welcome, welcome. We are thrilled to have you joining us tonight.
No.
Okay. Lynn, are we good to kick this thing off?
Yep. Okay. So first I'm going to read a disclaimer. Please remember this virtual meeting program could be monitored. So please ensure that conversations do not include any OPS EC or PERSEC information. This includes personal information about you and your family, what your significant other does, specific deployment information, and anything you feel is personal. This meeting is being recorded.
L'avertissement en français. N'oubliez pas que cette réunion ou ce programme virtuel va être surveillé. Veuillez donc vous assurer que les conversations n'incluent aucune information OPSEC ou PERCEC. Cela comprend les informations personnelles sur vous et votre famille, ce que fait votre partenaire, les informations de déploiement spécifiques et tout ce que vous jugez personnel. Ce programme est enregistré.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqueline.
So, hello, my name is Lynn Albrecht, and I'm the coordinator of mental health and wellness at the Kingston Military Family Resource Center. And we're very proud to be hosting this very important event. My job tonight is to first go over some of housekeeping with you in the audience and to introduce our two moderators for the evening. So I'm going to start first with the housekeeping. We're going to ask that you change your screen name to something identifiable, or something that's not identifiable, sorry, to protect the identity of you and your child. So if you could do that, that would be great. We just want you to maintain your anonymity. As we said, we are recording this so that if people have missed it, they can log into our website and listen to it later, or if you want to revisit anything that is said here tonight, you can go in and have a listen again. So also the other thing is, if you have any questions while this presentation is going on, you can type them into the chat box and we will try to get to all of them. So now, to my delight, I would like to introduce our two moderators. First, Reem Alamari is a third-year student in politics and government based in Ottawa on unceded traditional Algonquin territory. She's currently a youth ambassador for Children First Canada and an active member of the Centretown Community Health Centre in Ottawa. She's also been involved in the early years team there and other community initiatives. Reem is an advocate for better mental health services on her university campus and is proudly bilingual. And Faye Johnstone. Faye is a principal consultant with Wisdom to Action based on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory in Ottawa. With Wisdom to Action, she has led numerous projects nationally and provincially, focused on 2 SLGBTQ+ inclusion, youth mental health, and gender-based violence. She is currently on the board of directors of Kind Space, a member of the Ontario Youth Suicide Prevention Leadership Committee, and a member of the Regional Planning Table for Trans and Gender Diverse Health. Last, but certainly not least, Faye is known for her deep love of ferrets. She has 4, I'm told, and her involvement with the Ferret Rescue Society of Ontario. So I'm going to hand it over to Faye, and let's start tonight.
Awesome. Hi, folks. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It is an honor to be here and to serve as your moderator alongside Reem. Thank you first and foremost for taking the time out of your days and evenings and tuning in. I think adapting to the virtual world has changed a lot of our lives, but it also makes access to information and education easier in some interesting ways. And so hopefully that is exactly what you'll get out of this. New information and new info about resources and supporting the children and young folks in your families and communities. I do want to start by acknowledging that Reem and I have both joined today from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I think it is important when we convene in these kinds of spaces to recognize the histories of violence and colonial violence on these lands, to recognize the ways in which we think about and talk about mental health even are often framed in very colonial and very Western approaches, and to strive to unpack that every day in our practice as service providers, as individuals, as parents, as peers, and as families. I also want to acknowledge that I believe Kingston is based on the traditional territory of the Mohawk Tianigiago Nation, and to encourage folks to also touch base with their local communities and see what practices of reconciliation and decolonization are in place in your communities and what you can do to support local nations and local communities in resisting colonialism and standing in solidarity in the fight for liberation. Before I get into it, I'll just introduce myself and Reem as we are here on behalf of Wisdom to Action. So Wisdom to Action was founded in 2011 as a national knowledge mobilization network. So helping primarily child and youth mental health agencies across the country access to better information and better evidence to inform their practices, to really just deliver on better services for children and youth. And now we operate as a national social enterprise and consulting firm focused on community engagement, creative facilitation, knowledge mobilization, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I think I'll pass it over to Reem, but I do again want to thank folks for joining us today, and once more remind folks who are here to anonymize their names if they do have their names listed, as well as to keep their videos off and their mics muted so we can prevent any background noise. Finally, this is not a classroom context, so if you need to step out at any point, do what you need to do because you know your body best. And if you have any questions, as Lynn has said, just type them into the chat. As we go, we might not address them all in the moment, but we have time set aside at the end to type into them. So I will now turn it over to Reem to kick us off with a bit more of an intro.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Reem. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. So we're here tonight to learn more about supporting the mental health of our children and youth, especially around school during this extraordinary period. It's important to note that even before COVID-19, we knew that a lot of young people in Canada and in Ontario specifically struggled with anxiety. If we look at what Children's Mental Health Ontario has reported, half of Ontario parents have said that they've had concerns about their child's level of anxiety. 62% of Ontario youth report ever having had concerns about their level of about their own levels of anxiety, and only 3 in 10, so around 32% of youth have spoken to a mental health care professional about anxiety, so that's quite low. If we look at a global context, 70% of mental health problems have their onset during childhood or adolescence. So that's in the development stage of a person, yet in Canada, less than 1/5 of youth receive mental health services they need. So again, quite low. We also know that mental health doesn't impact us all in the same way. And due to systemic oppression and structural issues, particular communities are overrepresented in statistics related to poor mental health. So for example, if we look at Black, Indigenous, and folks of color, they tend to experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, isolation, and other issues related to mental health. And similarly, we know that 2S LGBTQ+ youth experience higher rates of suicidality and substance use. Youth from low-income communities have some of the highest rates of suicide and acute care mental health service use. And none of this is intrinsic necessarily to their identities, but it's rather due to how oppression puts some of these people at a greater risk than others.
I think part of our, oh, sorry, go ahead, Reem.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. I was just.
I think part of our intention here is to, you know, make space for that and to make space for those messy or tricky conversations as well, if and when we can, and just encourage folks to reflect on that as well. We also know that there are tons and tons and tons and tons of challenges in our current system. 76% of families surveyed indicated it was extremely difficult to know where to find help. And a lot of what we've seen around emergency department and hospital visits is over the past few years, we've seen a rise of 54 and 60% over the last decade in terms of young folks showing up in these emergency room contexts. We also know that anxiety impacts our schools. A lot of teachers have agreed that anxiety disorders were a pressing concern for them. Many parents, as many as 1 in 3, have seen children miss school due to anxiety, and 1 in 4 parents have missed work to care for a child with anxiety. And so we know this has a ripple effect. This doesn't just impact us, it impacts all of our communities in really significant ways that we're still actually trying to unpack. So now that we've done like a bit of a preamble to set the stage, we're gonna turn it over to our wonderful panelists tonight. And so we are gonna give every panelist an opportunity to introduce themselves. And we're gonna do this popcorn style because there are 10 of them and only 2 of us. And so we'll ask them each to say their names, their pronouns if they'd like, their place of work, and their role. So if my panelists don't mind, I'm actually gonna start naming y'all and you can just take it away. David, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, Dr. David Armstrong, Chief Psychologist and Mental Health Lead for Upper Canada District School Board, and he and him is the handles I like to be called.
I love it. And Megan, how about you? I'm going in order of how you show up on my screen.
Sure. My name is Megan Piovison. I am a special needs inclusion worker at the Kingston Military Family Resource Center, and my pronouns are she and her.
Awesome. And Shannon?
So my name is Shannon Parsons, and I am a secondary school social worker with the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, and my pronouns are she and her.
Perfect. Thomas?
Bonsoir tout le monde, je m'appelle Thomas Rinchet, je suis directeur de l'école élémentaire publique Madeleine de Roibon au sein du Conseil des écoles publiques de l'Est de l'Ontario et je préfère les pronoms il et lui. My name is Thomas Rinchet, I'm the principal of École Madeleine de Roibon, part of the French Public School Board of Eastern Ontario, and I prefer he, him.
Perfect. Et merci Thomas. Je veux aussi dire qu'on est capable de répondre aux questions en français aussi. Alors, on a 2 questions préparées ce soir qui sont en français, mais si vous en avez des autres, vous pouvez nous laisser savoir dans le chat. Mon français n'est pas parfait, mais j'essaie. I actually grew up and lived in Kingston for a few years and went to a full French school in Kingston called, I can't remember its name. It was kindergarten, but it was a great school. And so feel free to ask questions in English and French. We'll engage back as best we can. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah next.
Hi, my name is Sarah Green. I'm a Family Liaison Officer, Prevention Support and Intervention Worker at the Kingston Military Family Resource Center, which that big mouthful means that I provide mental health counseling to military families, which includes children and youth of CAF members.
Awesome. I'm actually a military brat as well. You're going to find out a lot of fun things about me. And my dad was in Kingston working at the artillery school. I also do want to give a shout out to Terry, who is our tech guy and who will probably remain muted for most of the evening unless the world falls apart on our tech side, but he's doing a great job so far. So thank you, Terry. And the tech people never get their shout outs. Over to Jacqueline next.
Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Jacqueline Baume. Je travaille au Centre Maltby. C'est une agence de santé mentale pour les enfants et les jeunes. Et je suis la thérapeute principale en santé mentale pour les services de langue française. My name is Jacqueline Baume, and I'm a registered psychotherapist, and I work at the Maltby Centre, which is a children and youth mental health agency, and I'm the senior mental health therapist there in French language services, and I go by she, her, et elle. Merci.
Awesome, thank you. And Jillian?
Hi, my name is Jillian Gunn. I'm a social worker with the Limestone District School Board based in 3 high schools. And my preferred pronouns are she and her.
Awesome, thank you. And Carol?
Bonjour, je m'appelle Carole Turbide. Je suis la travailleuse sociale avec le Conseil des écoles catholiques du Centre-Est. Je travaille dans les écoles secondaires et élémentaires à Brockville, Kingston et Trenton. Je préfère les pronoms elle. Hi, my name is Carole Turbide. I am the social worker with the Conseil des écoles catholiques du Centre-Est. And I work in the schools in Brockville, Kingston, and Trenton, both elementary and high school. And I prefer the pronouns il, sorry, not il, elle. I forget what it is in French, sorry, her and she. And Faye, you might have gone to Rémy-Gaulin. It's one of the French schools here in Kingston.
I'm trying to remember it. It was a good school. It wasn't Algonquin. Military brats. We moved too much, and I just can't remember where I. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. I know that. Madeleine du Rébon. Madeleine du Rébon. There we go.
It does still exist. They just moved.
Oh,
yeah.
Good to know.
We're now about 500 students, so it's gotten a lot larger since then.
I love that. I have not visited Kingston in a while, but I still have my class photos. And Mona Lise, would you like to go next? Oh, I think, there you go.
Bonjour, bonsoir. Merci à tout le monde d'être là. Moi, je m'appelle Mona Lise Dubé, puis je suis travailleuse sociale pour le Conseil scolaire, le Conseil des écoles publiques de l'Est de l'Ontario. Je travaille à Kingston et à Trenton. J'ai des écoles primaires et des écoles secondaires. Mon pronom, c'est elle. So my name is Mona Lise Dubé. I'm a social worker at the Conseil des écoles publiques de l'Est de l'Ontario. I work in primary sector and the high school sector, and my pronoun is she and her.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, we have Lee. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lee Wood-Landry. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm part of Megan's department as well. So I'm a special needs inclusion worker and a parent support specialist.
Awesome. Okay, so we will now kick it off so you can actually, get what you came here for and get all the info and facts that we can provide you with. So our panelists do know the order of the questions tonight, but I think I'll surprise a couple of them, which I just think keeps it interesting. But I will start with David Armstrong. So David, we've heard that many children and young folks are scared to attend school during COVID, which I think given the world that we live in, I'm scared to leave my apartment, so I can't blame them. But some are actively refusing to go to school at all. Could you walk us through some of your thoughts on school refusal and how to support parents or how parents can support their kids in those kinds of contexts?
Sure. Thanks, Faye. And I think you hit it right, the nail on the head there. And hopefully you're seeing this okay, this slide, school refusal anxiety. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up here. And that's one of the big points we want to make often with people is that if anxiety didn't go up in the midst of a pandemic, that's a mental health concern, probably a lot more than if it actually does. Because what anxiety does is it allows us to survive. There's a big, great reason it's there. And not only survive, but perform at our peak capacities. So a little bit of anxiety going into a test makes a lot of sense. A little bit of anxiety on the first day of a school or moving schools or anything, perfect sense. That's A-okay. What we're here to kind of talk about a lot is when it goes a little bit beyond that little bit of anxiety here. And so I want to tell you a few things about, first of all, sometimes what really doesn't work. And often, as caring parents, we want to take the child out of the situation. Again, if we didn't feel that way, there would be something wrong because we're designed to basically shelter and care for these little beings that we've birthed. Or whatever. And so sometimes we'll try and get them to completely avoid the situation or shelter them like, in class, and we're saying, okay, well, you don't have to go to school or you don't have to do the presentation. Sometimes forcing them in the situation and then getting angry when they don't is also difficult. Parents know that they need to learn how to do this, but they're not really sure of how to kind of get them there. And sometimes enduring a really panicked situation and then narrowly escaping in your perspective with your own neck doesn't make you at all less scared of the situation. Sometimes talking it out, a lot of people say, oh, just get them talk. But that doesn't seem to really help either, because people can talk for years about their neuroses, like every Woody Allen movie you've ever seen, that's what they do. And, getting to the bottom of the fear too. So, there's lots of situations that we're scared of, that we know where the fear came from, whether that's a traumatic event, whether that is, I got, a dog jumped up on me, a big dog when I was a kid, and now I'm scared of dogs. I know that's what happened, but it doesn't make me any less scared of dogs, okay? Sometimes when we're trying to help anxious kids, some of us might say, an example of what we might say is be like the pusher. So you need to go now, you need to get on the bus, you need to just go, come on, the bus is waiting, just go, this is so frustrating. Okay, that creates a lot of stress, and the kids don't really get over the stress that way. Also, sometimes our caring side takes over and we say, oh, your heart is racing, you feel sick to your stomach, I know doing the presentation is hard, I'll email the teacher so you don't have to do it. And then sometimes the anticipator too, that mom's going away for a work trip, and I know it's going to be hard for you, but it's just a little while, and maybe we'll take some mental health days from school and we'll just be home and we'll snuggle, and I know this is going to be super hard. The best thing to say to kids is somewhere in that middle. And so we need to think about, as we're going on tonight, a lot of our panelists are going to talk about the words and actions that tell a child, first of all, we understand how you feel, okay? And we know you can cope. And so that's some of the things that we're going to be talking about. How do we communicate both with our words and our actions to kids? We understand how you feel, and we know you can cope. Now, I wanted to talk specifically a little bit about, and I know I've got about one more minute here, but just to cover, because I know these themes are going to come up. So there's a really great book, and I've got it in the last slide here, by Christopher Kearney. If you're worried about children kind of getting to school, there is a one for school professionals, there's one for psychologists and social workers and psychotherapists, and there's this one that is great for parents. Okay, it's called Getting Your Child to Say Yes to School. And what Dr. Kearney does, he goes over 4 different reasons why children might, a lot of children, let's say 90%, might be avoiding school. That is, we're ruling out things like bullying, we're ruling out authentic danger things that are happening at school. Okay, but let's say we've ruled that out. There's 4 different things. And I wanted to touch on a little bit of some of them. Okay, sometimes, especially our little guys, they just get general stress. They, come to us saying, my tummy hurts, achy, I don't know, I don't like school, yada, yada. And so what do we do with that? Well, first of all, what we do with those children is we try and get them to practice calming strategies daily. Okay, a lot of times when parents try this, they hear, okay, go and they'll hear that breathing is a good exercise. But, if we only try and get them to deep breathe when they're in stress, it's kind of like teaching a person to swim by taking them out in the boat and throwing them overboard. I know some of us did learn how to swim like that. I'm not saying it's going to be the best method though. So practicing the deep breathing, the muscle relaxation, some of these things daily. And then responding positively when they're feeling that and reminding them of those strategies. We're not allowed, and again, we're communicating, I know this is hard, or I know I know how you're feeling, but I know you can cope, and here's some strategies for it. Sometimes though, when they get a little older, and this is very normal for, let's say your middle school, high schoolers, for social fears. So they don't want to go to school because they're worried about talking to other people. They're worried about having conversations, reading in front of the class. They're worried about this sort of thing. What are people thinking of me? And so what we might do in that situation to get them coming to school is temporary accommodation. And what I mean by temporary accommodation is, let's say we are going to look and see what parts of the day are really stressing that child out. So whether that is choral reading, whether that's a presentation coming up, whether that's a lunch hour, and they're trying to find, someone in the cafeteria or trying to find someone to talk to, we can problem solve that as a school team with parents and administrators or teachers, and think about, you know, if they're having trouble making friends, and they're really worried about going to school because they don't know who they're going to sit with in the cafeteria. Okay, I bet you we can troubleshoot that. But again, we want to make that temporary, because we don't want the type of situation where they're always, you know, getting allowed to escape the situation. Or let's say, you know, if they've got presentations to do, that they're always doing it privately in front of a teacher, because we, again, we understand how they're feeling and we know they can cope. So we want to build that independence in them. And then this is involving things like exposure or CBT, daily practice being in those uncomfortable situations where we take them at something easy that they can do, and we gradually build and show them how they can do these things. Another one for the younger kids is they are escaping to get with us, okay? And if your child is, you know, crying and clawing at you and not wanting to leave, that's okay. It means you're a great parent and they want to be around you, and home is a great place to be, okay? But it's not adaptive for their long term. And so the types of things we do is, first of all, having a morning routine. We're going to wake them up at least 90 minutes before we've got to get them out the door. And we are going to have a little kind of built-in you know, built-in kind of rewards or high fives or praise for that. We also want to make sure that school is more attractive than home. That can be really hard because school sometimes isn't an attractive place to be. And so we're just going to make sure that if they are staying at home, if they do miss a day, it's not a day of cuddles and video games and doing whatever they want, okay? With the virtual stuff that different school boards are doing, getting them in front of a laptop and doing some of this virtually is an option that we can do. But we want to make sure that, you know, we're going to do that. And also we're going to practice independence. For example, mom taking a walk to the mailbox, leaving the child at home, depending on the age, or leaving them with babysitters or a parent or an uncle or whatever. And so we're going to build that independence and separation from us. And finally, I know this is hard to believe, but some people, you know, find there's other things that are more enjoyable than school. And if you think, you know, what's more enjoyable in school? Well, pretty much everything. It's a real uphill battle. And in fact, I'm surprised people even come to school, that we can get all these teenagers there. But they do, because it's routine. And, you know, we've got some really engaging educators out there. But what do we do when you know, it's just kind of the truancy issues, and we still practice that morning routine with them, okay? Except for the teenager, we're still getting up 90 minutes or 2 hours ahead of time, and we are being a pain in the butt all morning, our loudest possible selves when we are making breakfast and up and at them, and we are just making it generally uncomfortable to stay in that bed. We're also going to put in a contract or attendance contract for kids, that we can make sure that the things at home that they enjoy and would normally get, they're contingent upon going to some level of school. And with every child, that's a little bit different, but troubleshooting all these is kind of what we do. And so what I'm hoping you kind of get out of that long-winded explanation, I'm sorry for that, is that, you know, if you're as we're going on, I'm guessing all these wonderful clinicians are already going to be thinking about the categories of kids. What are they getting or avoiding when they're saying they don't want to go to school? And how can we adapt that? How can we let them know that, first of all, we know how you're feeling. And secondly, we know you can cope. And here's some ways we're going to help. Okay, so that's my question.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I do want to flag for folks on the chat. I know that I've said a couple times to change your name to be anonymous. But I realize now that many people might not know how to do that. And so if you go to where your name is showing up on the screen, you can click, there's a little box that has 3 little dots in it. And if you click that box, there's a rename option. And so if you are on this call and you're not a panelist, you can click that little box, go down to the rename option and change your name to something fun and funky. And if it gets a laugh out of me, I will send you a coffee at some point in your life. I won't say when, but at some point you'll get a free coffee. Our next question is actually a joint question for both Megan and Lee. And so I'll leave it up to y'all how you like fight it out for who speaks first. But I'm curious around some daily strategies that families can implement to help children and young folks build their sense of security and reduce their anxiety. And so over to y'all, take it away.
Absolutely. Thanks, Faye. And thank you, David, for the slides that you shared. We're just going to share a little bit of some of the strategies that we're going to talk about here. So is everybody able to see that right now? Perfect, thank you. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is the consistent routine, and that was touched on as well with what David was speaking about, and that's really a key part of reducing anxiety. So we have a few things that we wanted to touch on, and one of them, which is extremely important, is share your calm. And Dr. Jean Clinton talks about this a great deal, about making sure that you model that for your children and youth. So new routines don't just take time, they take a lot of repetition, and they do take patience. So if parents can help model that for their children and youth and show that in their day-to-day, then it's going to become a reality for the children and youth as well. Another one is sometimes children and youth have what we might call analysis paralysis. So there's just too much going on, too much uncertainty, too many choices. And so we might offer some controlled choices. So there might be a list or some visuals for some of the after-school activities and tasks that always happen. They happen every day, but we encourage children to choose the order in which to complete them. And that gives them that bit of agency. They're still completing the tasks, but they're building their independence and getting to use their choices as well. Our next point is helping children build their sense of capability and confidence and increase their chance of success by setting SMART goals. And this is talked about a lot in schools as well, but just to really help children realize that they can be on the right path if they choose things that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. They're shooting for the right goal and objective. And the last thing, and this is going to lead into what Megan speaks about in terms of some of the things that we do a lot at the KMFRC, is providing visual supports to help make a routine familiar. And these schedules can be divided into sections of time. They might have key events or specific transitions like before school, after school, and bedtime, or they might be tailored as well for when it's weekend.
Yes, thank you, Lee. I'm not going to fight you. I'm just going to start talking.
That's good.
So Lee mentioned that at the KMFRC and our team specifically, we do provide free visuals that are customized for military families, if that's something that you're in need of. So we talked about visual schedules, but visual schedules doesn't always have to mean pictures. Maybe you have an older child and it's more appropriate for you to write out a list for them. Or maybe they don't need their full day written out. They just need those 3 really hard things that they have to do that day on a piece of paper so that they can check it off and feel really great about themselves when they're completed. And I really liked actually what David said about building in reinforcement with the day and making school and the routine that they're really grounded in reinforcing. So maybe if you have a young child and you have a visual schedule for them, it's themed with their favorite movie. Or maybe the last activity on that schedule is super reinforcing. Maybe it's something you can do together. Just something that grounds them so that in their everyday life, they know what's coming. And that's especially useful. I know Lee and I work with a lot of children and youth who have comorbid conditions in addition to anxiety. So routine is a big one. Consistency is definitely key. That's what we would say. That's pretty much it for us.
Thank you, Megan and Lee. So just to reiterate what Faye has said, si vous venez de nous rejoindre, n'oubliez pas de changer votre nom. Donc c'est en haut à droite, les 3 petits points. Vous pouvez juste cliquer sur l'icône Rename et changer votre nom à quelque chose comme ça, on ne vous identifie pas pour la protection de vous et de votre enfant. Donc la prochaine question est pour Thomas. Donc c'est lorsque les 2 parents doivent être présents physiquement au travail, comment explique-t-on aux enfants que l'école virtuelle n'est pas une option pour eux, alors que préférer cela? So just to explain that in English quickly, when 2 parents have to physically be present at school, how do you explain to your child that wants to attend virtual online school at home that this is not an option for them?
Merci beaucoup, Reem. Donc, bonsoir tout le monde. J'espère que vous vous portez bien. Certains de mes homologues de d'autres conseils et organismes ont déjà touché un peu sur ces points-là. Par exemple, David a discuté un peu de l'aspect de rendre l'école un peu plus amusant que d'être à la maison. Alors, lorsque l'enfant est à la maison, c'est important de faire en sorte qu'il est là vraiment pour des raisons de maladie ou autres raisons connexes, que ce n'est pas une récompense de rester à la maison ou de s'évader d'une situation particulière. Maintenant, avec la pandémie, c'est certain que plusieurs élèves se retrouvent en ligne ou bien en présentiel, et c'est une réalité pour plusieurs parents de nos jours, les 2 parents qui travaillent, qui ne peuvent pas rester à la maison. Moi, je vous encourage fortement à demander une rencontre de transition avec l'équipe école de votre enfant, donc un membre de la direction, ainsi que l'enseignant attitré à votre enfant, afin de pouvoir discuter un peu de ses inquiétudes et de vos préoccupations, de vos doléances par rapport à la fréquentation scolaire de votre enfant. Comme cela, on peut au moins assurer une bonne transition pour que l'enfant se sente à l'aise lorsqu'il arrive à l'école. Souvent, ce qu'on va faire, c'est céduler ou fixer plutôt des rencontres, soit en présentiel, soit en mode virtuel, pour pouvoir visiter la salle de classe, rencontrer l'enseignant et vraiment voir l'aspect positif de l'école en présentiel. On peut également demander à l'enseignant de jumeler l'enfant avec un autre élève de la classe pour pouvoir un peu agir à titre de mentor pour assurer une transition. C'est quand même très important, comme David avait aussi mentionné, c'est important de s'assurer que ces mesures qui sont mises en place soient là de façon temporaire et au fur et à mesure que l'enfant s'habitue à son quotidien à l'école, nous pouvons enlever ces supports qui sont en place. Bien sûr, si vous avez des préoccupations par rapport à la santé mentale de votre enfant, vous pouvez aussi demander la possibilité de services en travail social à l'école. Et ce sont souvent des interventions plutôt précises que nous pouvons fixer avec votre enfant et avec votre famille pour assurer sa réussite scolaire. Donc, c'est plus ou moins comme ça que moi, j'aborderais une telle situation. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just going to recap that quickly for our viewers who don't speak French. So Thomas was just explaining that, the situation, there's lots of children online and in schools, and so transitions are important. Suggestions could be a transition meeting with the administration to discuss these preoccupations that some children have. That way we can ensure that the child feels a little bit more comfortable. They can see the school, they can talk to the teacher. You can also ask the teacher to pair, the child with another student, just to put in place these temporary supports for the child to feel a little bit more comfortable. And if you do have preoccupations about the mental health of your child, it's always a good idea to ask for support from the school itself, whether that be counseling or social services, etc. So with that being said, I think Faye will continue with the questions.
I also want to give a shout out to Reem for live taking notes when Thomas is speaking so that she could report back in English. So thank you for that, because I was like, oh God, I'm not going to remember all of this and my French is not up to par to live translate in my brain. So my next question is for Shannon. And so we know that a lot of parents are kind of struggling to find ways to help and respond to their kids' expressions of anxiety. A lot of kids are really anxious right now, and parents are probably a little bit reeling, especially if this is something that is new, due or associated with COVID. And so can you tell us a bit about how parents can respond to their teens in particular and their expressions of anxiety in ways that are helpful for those young folks?
Sure. So the first thing I think I can, recommend or offer is just that parents take care of their own emotional needs first and foremost, even before you're confronted with, a challenging child with anxiety or whatever. It's important to keep your own kind of emotions and fears and worries sort of in check so that while your child is talking to you about their anxiety or whatever, you can kind of keep it together until afterwards when you can talk to another adult or vent to a friend or whatever in those kind of more safer spaces for parents to do that in. So taking care of yourself, talking to, your partners or your friends or other parents or whatever, just about some of your own fears and worries about COVID or other things that are going on. That can just help you to sort of keep it together a little bit while you're sort of dealing with your child. Excuse me. The second thing I'm thinking in terms of responses is just, I think this was mentioned earlier, but showing an understanding of the child's or teen's fear and worry, even if it seems really minor or kind of unrealistic or whatever. So, you know, if a child says, I'm never going to pass this test, you can respond by saying something like, it seems like this test is really important to you and you're worried you're not going to do as well as you think you should or whatever on it, or as well as you want to do rather. Or, you know, if the child says, everybody hates me at school, nobody likes me, you can respond by saying something like, oh, like making and keeping friends is really hard, isn't it? And just showing a little bit of validation and understanding about their fear and worry can go a long way to sort of just like keeping them regulated so that they can maybe have a conversation and do some problem solving or whatever, use a strategy about it. The first piece is kind of that validation part. Another thing is validating brave behaviors. Sorry, excuse me, I have a tickle. So validating brave behaviors is kind of like whenever a child or teen does the opposite of avoiding something or uses a strategy, you want to just make sure that those things are being noticed and that the child understands that you see them making efforts. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to like throw a party every time a kid uses a strategy or whatever, but just saying like, oh, I noticed you took a minute and did some deep breathing before you tried this, or just trying this was like, I really noticed that, you put some effort in there and you sort of like, I could see you like talking yourself into doing X, Y, or Z or whatever. Excuse me. So validating those things that they are trying and the strategies they are using and making sure that those things don't go unnoticed can be helpful. I want to make a note too about excessive reassurance. So sometimes, if a kid is saying something like, I'm so stupid, or I'm never going to pass these tests, or everybody hates me, or whatever, sometimes parents can fall into a trap of being like, no, like you have lots of friends, or, everybody's loving you, you're such a great person, you're so smart, blah, blah, blah. And all those things are like, good, like you should tell your kids those things, but when you do it kind of like over and over and over again, every time a kid brings up a worry, they start to seek out that external validation rather than kind of like understanding it within themselves that they have those skills and strategies and ways to cope and all that stuff. So you can respond by saying like one piece of reassurance, like, oh no, like for example, if they're saying, oh, you just hate me or whatever, you can be like, no, I really love you. And then you can ask them about times in the past when that's been true. Like, oh, like how many times before have I told you that I loved you? Or, we've done this and that together and we had a really good time doing this. So I think that's like, a way that kind of proves that I do love you or whatever. And sort of asking them about these past experiences that kind of prove or evidence against whatever it is that they're worrying about. Excuse me. And then the last thing I just kind of wanted to mention is about procrastination. So this sometimes like drives parents nuts when, kids are so anxious about assignments or tests or whatever, and they just keep putting it off and they don't get anything done, and it's like becomes a bigger problem than anything. So procrastination is a type of avoidance, and it's important to sort of recognize it as that and not just that this student or child is being lazy. Anxiety can be quite paralyzing if it gets bad enough. And so responding with some understanding and empathy can be helpful. And then you can kind of, once you've got that down, you can sort of move into the problem solving bit about setting SMART goals, like was mentioned earlier, and just kind of like breaking down whatever the big assignment or test is that they're worrying about into like smaller chunks that are maybe a little bit more manageable. And I think that was everything that I wanted to say about that question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. I do want to take a moment to remind folks that if you do have any questions, you should be able to type them into the chat and they will go to our wonderful colleague, Lynn, who will then pass them along to us so that at the end we can dive through anything or dive into anything that is coming up on your ends as participants, because we do want to make sure that as much as possible, we're giving y'all practical stuff that actually, and I think we've done that. I think our panelists so far have been phenomenal, but just so we can really address any specific questions that do come up. And I think I'll pass it over to Reem again now.
Okay, thanks. So, la prochaine question est pour Mona Lise. Donc, quel conseil donneriez-vous aux parents qui sont aux prises avec leur propre santé mentale et leur stress pendant le Covid-19, tout en essayant simultanément de soutenir et de rassurer un jeune en difficulté.
Oui. Donc, en premier lieu, il faut noter aussi l'importance du rôle de parent puis d'adulte significatif dans la vie d'un enfant. Donc, comme il a été mentionné, vous êtes leur premier modèle. Fait que, être une présence positive, modeler un comportement sain, prendre soin de soi, c'est des choses qui sont importantes. Mais il ne faut pas oublier que être attentif à nos besoins comme adultes, ça fait un peu allusion au masque d'oxygène dans un avion. Donc, si on le met nous-mêmes, il faut le mettre nous-mêmes avant même de pouvoir espérer aider les autres personnes, incluant nos enfants, notre conjoint. Donc, il est important, premièrement, d'être conscient, puis d'accepter nos propres vulnérabilités. Fait que si on a une santé mentale plus fragile, il faut être au courant de notre propre situation, voir notre médecin, avoir des suivis. Si on a une médication, d'assurer qu'on a le bon dosage, de reconnaître les déclencheurs que nous, on a, les déclencheurs, puis aussi nos besoins. Fait qu'est-ce que j'ai besoin dans une situation d'anxiété ou autre? On peut s'accorder aussi du temps. Donc, c'est important comme parents aussi d'avoir des stratégies. On entend des stratégies pour les enfants, mais comme parents, c'est important d'avoir nos propres stratégies. Ça peut être, par exemple, la pleine conscience, le mindfulness, qui est un terme qui est quand même assez d'usage fréquent. Être dans le moment présent, rester calme, se faire confiance, faire confiance à nos capacités comme parents, faire preuve de compassion envers vous-même. Donc, ça, c'est super important. Vous êtes humain, vous aussi. Être positif envers soi-même est un bon modèle aussi à prendre. Il y a eu mention tantôt par Shannon, je crois, par rapport aux ressources, les stratégies qui peuvent être utilisées pour les enfants. Puis aussi le fait d'être conscient nous-mêmes de nos stratégies puis de nos ressources, de les utiliser. Ça peut être la respiration, prendre des pauses, faire des siestes, écouter de la musique. Il y a plein d'activités physiques, être avec des amis, la nourriture, une bonne alimentation saine, prendre du temps seul, d'être conscient de trouver une stratégie qui fonctionne pour nous, puis de l'utiliser dans notre routine au quotidien. Fait que la routine est super importante pour les enfants, mais c'est aussi important comme adulte d'avoir sa propre routine. Donc, si on veut bien modeler, si on montre dans le fond qu'on est conscient de nos propres situations, qu'on normalise nos sentiments, qu'on est vrai envers nous-mêmes, ça va être plus facile pour vos enfants de suivre votre modèle et d'accepter aussi que la santé mentale, c'est comme la santé physique. C'est important d'en prendre soin. Puis ensuite, le reste peut suivre avec le modelage parce que vous allez être un bon modèle positif pour votre enfant. Donc, c'est ce que j'ai à partager.
Okay, thank you, Mona-Lise. So just to recap that quickly, the question is about, from a parent's perspective, if you're stressed during COVID, how do you deal with that as a parent, all while trying to help and reassure your child? And so what's really important here is understanding the significant role the adult here has as a role model for their child. So you have to take care of yourself. And some of the key things that Mona-Lise said is that, you need to accept your vulnerability and acknowledge it. So see a professional, understand your triggers as a parent. And it's really, really important to have your own strategies as well. So whether that be mindfulness, being the present, being confident in your capacities, and also having compassion towards yourself and being positive towards yourself. There have been many suggestions of different strategies, whether that be breathing, being alone, any type of exercise. It's really, really important to find your own strategy and make it part of your routine, because just as routine is important for children, it's also important for you as a parent. So just accepting here that mental health is also just as important as physical health. So that being said, I'm just going to pass it on to Faye.
Awesome. Our next question is for Jacqueline. So how do you create, or how would you tell the difference between, particularly during these times, I think, between anxiety and stress? Because there's often a lot of blurry ground between the two, and you get a two-parter, so you're special. How do you create a space where your child can open up to you about what's actually going on in their world and their lives?
Okay, so I will try to keep the answers as short and sweet as possible, only because there is some overlap in some of the answers. And if I have time, I might squeeze in some French to answer the question in French, just so that it's bilingual answer. So in terms of the difference between anxiety and stress, so Dr. David Armstrong mentioned earlier general stress when he was showing his slides, and being able to use those calming strategies, the deep breathing, and make sure you're practicing it daily, reminding your children of those strategies, making sure you're using the terminologies of I understand, but I also know that you can cope. So building that independence in the children. So coming back to that general stress, keeping in mind that stress in itself is a response to a threat in a situation. So the cause is external. So, you know, a tight deadline for a school assignment, or an argument with a friend, or something with the environment, particularly right now, obviously with the pandemic, a lot of people are experiencing a lot of stress, whereas anxiety is more a reaction to the stress. So the origin of it is more internal. So it's usually characterized by these constant feelings of dread or apprehension or worry, which I know a lot of us keep mentioning, in situations that are not maybe actually threatening. So unlike the stress, the anxiety tends to persist even after some of that worry has passed. And in obviously more severe cases, the anxiety can actually escalate into an anxiety disorder. And there is a fine line between the two, and it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference, but sometimes just a short question might tell you if it's external or if it's internal. I tend to do a lot of work with individuals who struggle with anxiety. I do a lot of CBT work, so cognitive behavioral therapy. And so a lot of the focus is on those thoughts, those automatic thoughts that we have when we're feeling anxious. So coming back to, it's not necessarily a threat, it's more how you're thinking about certain situations or how you're thinking about stress itself. So la question, c'était la différence entre l'anxiété et le stress. Donc, juste pour répondre un petit peu vite fait, le stress, c'est plutôt une réponse à une situation, tandis que l'anxiété, c'est plutôt une réaction au stress. Donc, le stress lui-même, c'est une cause qui est externe, tandis que l'anxiété, c'est plutôt avec une origine qui est interne. C'est plutôt les pensées, puis peut-être même les situations ne sont pas des situations de danger, tandis que le stress, notre corps voit ça comme une situation de danger. Donc, juste une petite explication en français. So to the next question, so how to create a space where your child can open up to you about what is going on in their world. So I feel quite a few of the panelists had actually touched base on this a little bit. I know, Faye, right at the very beginning, in part of your intro, you said something about making space for some of the tougher conversations and being conscious of being able to do that, especially with marginalized folk, obviously. And so, you know, kind of taking that and using that in your home as well, and making sure that there's space for tough conversations, that there's that understanding, like David mentioned earlier and Shannon mentioned, I know a few of you mentioned that understanding. David also said a few things that weren't helpful, such as talking things out sometimes, or even trying to get to the bottom of it, being that pusher. So I think doing that might not create that safe space, even though you think it is, because you're thinking, hey, I'm allowing my child to talk and I'm trying to get them to talk. But sometimes if you push too much, people will definitely put up blockers and they won't want to. I know Shannon mentioned validation and understanding so that the children feel like they're understood. So making sure, again, you go back to that, I understand where you're coming from, and you can even paraphrase it so that they truly know that you understand. But then saying, but I know that you can cope with this, and either reminding them of some of the coping strategies that you guys have gone through together, or coming up with new ones, or what have you. Alors pour l'espace pour ton enfant, pour qu'il puisse s'ouvrir à vous autres, si vous pensez qu'il y a quelque chose qui arrive, c'est vraiment, tu veux pas trop pousser, mais tu veux démontrer la compréhension, puis de l'empathie, puis tu veux leur montrer que ce qu'ils sont en train de te dire, je t'en perds pour mes mots, que c'est ce qu'ils sont en train de dire, que tu comprends ce qu'ils disent, puis que vous êtes capable de leur dire, mais je sais que tu es capable de gérer ça. Mona Lise aussi, elle avait mentionné, nous autres comme parents, je dis ça parce que j'ai des enfants moi aussi, mais les parents, on est humains aussi, puis en montrant aux enfants que nous autres aussi, on est humains, puis nous autres aussi, on n'est pas parfaits, puis nous autres aussi, on a de l'anxiété des fois, puis le stress des fois. Mais juste essayer de rester calme, puis montrer-leur de la compassion, mais pas seulement pour eux autres, mais pour vous autres aussi. Puis ça va démontrer que, écoute, moi aussi, j'ai des craintes, moi aussi, j'ai des peurs, donc tu peux m'en parler des tiens. So, in terms of just some tips for creating that open space, you know, making sure you're not judging. I know Shannon mentioned earlier, it might seem trivial to adults, what a child might be bringing up. It might seem like it's not that big of a deal to us, but to them in that moment, it's a huge deal. And we have to remember that everything is relative. So to them, the life that they've experienced, you know, a 10-year-old, they've only lived for 10 years. And so whatever it is that they're experiencing, if they're making it seem like it's a really big deal to them, then it's a really big deal to them. So don't judge. The other piece too is asking before giving advice. Sometimes people literally just want to vent and go on and on and on, and they don't want you to give them advice. They don't want you to be that fixer. So try not to be the mechanic in the situation and just listen unless they ask for it. And then also don't overreact. So that comes back to someone bringing something up that might seem trivial to you, but is a big deal to them. But also in situations where something actually is a pretty big deal, as a parent might be scary. Someone might be your child might be talking to you about a friend of theirs who's dealing with substances or who is dealing with suicidal thoughts, and you don't want to overreact in those situations and create even more fear. And then sticking with them, obviously, and showing them that you're there to support them and you're there by their side. And then finally, obviously, the empathy piece, which I know we keep mentioning, being empathetic and understanding. You might not have ever been in those shoes, but try and understand from where they're coming from. Asking open-ended questions when your children get home from school is also another good way. There's this great article by Dr. Linda Papadopoulos. I meant to pull it up for my slides, but I couldn't. But she said the main three things is choosing the right time to have these conversations, asking open-ended questions, and don't force the conversation, just really listen. Alors, juste pour le dire en français, c'est assurez-vous que quand vous parlez avec vos enfants, c'est un bon temps, que les questions sont ouvertes, c'est pas une question de oui ou non, puis forcez pas la conversation, soyez vraiment là pour écouter les enfants, puis montrez-leur de l'empathie, puis que vous comprenez, ça ne dérange pas c'est quoi le problème, vous comprenez, puis c'est ça. And then finally, just to wrap up, I did want to show an awesome little website, so a resource. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. Just give me a second, share screen. Post. Oh, okay, apparently I can't share it right now.
You may not be able to, but what I maybe can ask is if you send it along to us following, we can maybe ask that it be sent out to panelists or to participants.
Yeah, so the website is called watchwellcast.tumblr.com. So it's a Tumblr one, but the videos are all posted to YouTube as well. And it's just Wellcast, but it has lots of like little episodes and videos, and there was one on stress and one on automatic thoughts. So I just thought it showed the nice dichotomy between stress and anxiety. But they have so many little videos, and they're like these little animated videos that are really, really easy to understand for kids. There's some that are probably more geared towards teens, but there are some that are geared towards younger children. So just something to check out if you feel like your kid's struggling with some mental health concerns. Maybe see if there's a video that you might be able to show them that might be helpful. And I think that, yeah,
you can actually should be able to share your screen now.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
Do you feel powerful, Jacqueline?
I sure do. Okay, there. So this is the website, and this was one of the videos. I'm not actually going to play it because it's 5 minutes long, but this was the automatic thoughts one, and then there was the stress relief one. But just to kind of give you a quick idea.
Today we're going to talk about ATs, also known as automatic thoughts. They're those destructive and unreasonably negative thoughts that you have that make things go from bad to worse. Avoiding ATs feels as impossible as avoiding red lights when you're running late.
So just to give you a little taste of what it is. So the woman who who talks over the little animations, is quite animated herself. So anyways, it's just little videos like that that kind of go on for 4 to 5 minutes each of them, and just a resource that would be really helpful. So
awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you in particular for translating yourself on the go as you did. That is very nice. I do want to, without getting too biased into some of the work that we've done at Wisdom to Action, we do actually, we've worked with School Mental Health Ontario, who provide broader system support to school boards across the province to create some resources around around COVID and mental health and anxiety. So if you check out our website, www.wisdomtoaction.org, there are actually some really nice resources that talk about the difference between anxiety and stress, and that mirror a lot of what Jacqueline has said, and as well as some practical tools and techniques that folks can use with themselves, honestly, like as parents, like we also, like, well, not a parent, but y'all also need this. My 4 ferrets also need some anxiety support. But there's some really great resources that are designed to be user-friendly if you just check out our resource section and based in the best evidence available. I will pass it back along to, I think Reem has the next question, but I'm scrolling through my, yes, okay, back over to you, Reem.
Yeah, so thanks, Faye. So the next question is for Jillian, actually. So we know that anxiety can look and present in various ways in different children and youth. So could you please speak to some of the ways, particularly physical signs, that children and youth tend to express anxiety when they experience it? So how does it look like on them?
My apologies, I lost the screen for a moment there. So I think I now have an example for my talk of momentary panic. Thank you very much. I think this is an important question. And I want to start with saying that, you know, all emotions have a physical component and vice versa. All physical symptoms have an emotional and psychological component as well. And what I'm referring to is that mind-body connection. So what I mean by that is that in any situation, we have emotions about that situation, physical sensations, thoughts, behaviors. So when I lost the screen, I felt some nervousness, some worry. My heart started beating a little faster. I got feeling jittery. And I had a moment of shuffling my papers around and thinking to myself, what if I miss my moment? So I think we can all relate to that connection. And the reason why I think it's so important to think about that connection between our mind and our body is because anxiety in particular can be an incredibly physical experience. And one of the things I do when I'm speaking with young people and talking to them about this is I think it can be really helpful to understand a little bit about the brain physiology and sort of from an evolutionary perspective. Now, I want to be very, very clear, I'm not a neurologist at all, but I know some of the basics. And the part of the brain I think is really important for us to think about in terms of anxiety is something called the amygdala. And I like to think of it as the emotion center of the brain. When the amygdala is activated, it turns on something called our sympathetic nervous system. Or you might have heard the phrase fight, flight, or freeze. This is the system in our brain that the goal of it is survival. So if you think back to kind of cave people times, when the cave person bumped into the saber-toothed tiger on the savannah, their amygdala was activated and they had 3 options. They could fight it, they could run away from it, or they could lie down and play dead or hide from it. That's the fight, flight, freeze response. And our kids are not running into saber-toothed tigers anywhere, but they are facing social challenges, a math test, the presentation in English class, balancing job and school and social. And the amygdala actually responds to these situations or can respond to these stressors that our kids are facing, similarly to the saber-toothed tiger. And so what the job of that sympathetic nervous system is really to help us react automatically in dangerous situations. So again, probably everyone can relate to that sense of walking down the street and a massive truck flies right by you and you don't even think about it. You just jump back and all your muscles tense up and you leap away from it. That's kind of that fight, flight, freeze response. When our fight, flight, freeze response is activated, it increases the chances of the distress being experienced in a physical way. So when we think about anxiety, some sort of what happens is there are hormones that get released from the brain and they send signals to the body. And that's why our muscles tense up, our lungs get activated, and our breath can get short and shallow. It might have an experience of a stomach ache or nausea or diarrhea or vomiting even, muscle tension, sweating, shaking, dizziness, and a really frequent urge to pee, dry mouth, headaches, all those sorts of things. And for some youth and children, that paying attention and noticing those physical symptoms for all sorts of different reasons is a little easier than recognizing or acknowledging or verbalizing the emotions that they're experiencing. So they might talk about, I've got a tummy ache, I can't go to school today. Or you get a call from the school that your child has a headache and needs to come home. And I think right now that some of that is complicated by COVID, because some of those symptoms are on the list of symptoms that need to be addressed and children kept home from school. So I think it can be a confusing time, and it's challenging for parents and it's challenging for schools. But I think what we want to think about is that when these symptoms show up related in response to a stressful situation or related to anxiety that the child's experiencing, the symptoms tend to go away once the stressful situation is over or they're removed from it in some way. So that can maybe be something to keep in mind. I think what we want to try and do is help children and youth to be able to understand that mind-body connection. And one of the best ways to do that is to model it. So when you are have a presentation you have to do at work, talk about how that feels in your body. Or if you're driving down the street and someone cuts in front of you, talk about, whoa, that really surprised me. My stomach clenched up as soon as that person cut me off. That can help them to understand and be able to potentially start to recognize that within themselves. Another thing you can try and do is watch for some patterns or triggers and naming it for the child. Now, I noticed for the last few days before going to school, you talk about your tummy hurting. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that. Or your teacher called me and said that every time before recess, you complain of a headache. So watching for those patterns. And I think partnering with the school and seeing them as a partner to try and understand what's going on can be really important. There are lots of resources at the schools to help you do that. Certainly, if any child's ever experiencing sort of persistent ongoing physical symptoms, you do want to consult with your family doctor. There can be all sorts of explanations and things going on. So you want to make sure that everything's being considered and looked at. But I think the most important thing is to recognize that the symptoms are real. They're not making them up. They're not faking it, quote unquote, but they're real, and validating that experience, as well as trying to help them start to make those connections, can be really, really helpful for your child or young person. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. totally had a comment, but I lost my train of thought. So instead I will respond by saying, I am now going to try a full question in French. We will see just how good the French instruction at Madeleine du Bon really was for me. It was decent. So, Carol, comment faire pour que mon enfant de 10 ans me parle ou m'explique pourquoi il ne veut pas aller à l'école? Comment peut-on encourager nos jeunes adolescents à faire leurs travaux et leurs devoirs quotidiennement afin d'éviter la panique et l'anxiété de la dernière minute? So in English quickly, how can we help a child of like 10 years old or so speak to us and explain to us why they don't want to go to school, and how can we help a young adolescent get their homework done, which like I'm about to graduate from my master's and I'm still not good at, and make sure that they're doing their homework and all of their like out of school work on time without to avoid the like severe anxiety of realizing that you have something due at 8 a.m. the next day. So Carol, take it away.
Merci, Faye. Ton français n'est pas si pire que ça, donc bravo. Merci d'avoir tenté ta chance en français.
Merci.
Donc, Jacqueline a un peu parlé de comment créer un environnement sécuritaire pour nos enfants et de se faire sentir en sécurité pour avoir ces conversations difficiles. Donc, je vais essayer de ne pas trop me répéter, mais je pense que c'est important de lui en parler ouvertement, d'assurer que vous choisissez un bon moment pour avoir cette conversation. Donc, par exemple, le faire pas dans le jeu, dans la voiture, comme ça, ils ne peuvent pas s'échapper lorsqu'ils sont dans la voiture, ils sont pris un peu avec vous. Pendant une marche familiale, des situations où vous savez déjà que votre enfant est calme, disponible à avoir des conversations. Je dirais d'éviter d'avoir ces conversations plutôt difficiles en avant de la fratrie. Donc, s'il y a des frères et sœurs, n'ayez pas cette conversation en avant d'eux. Lorsque vous, en tant qu'adulte, vous n'êtes pas dans un état de calme, ou même lorsque l'enfant est occupé. Donc, si jamais l'enfant est en train de jouer à un jeu, n'interrompez pas une activité plaisante pour avoir cette conversation avec eux. Je pense que c'est important de le nommer directement, donc de dire regarde, j'ai remarqué que tu ne veux pas aller à l'école, je m'inquiète pour toi, je suis ici pour comprendre qu'est-ce qui se passe, je ne veux pas te chicaner, tu ne vas pas être puni par rapport à ça, mais je veux vraiment comprendre pour pouvoir t'aider pour savoir qu'est-ce qui se passe. Puis de dire sûrement tu ne te sens pas bien dans ton corps, donc d'avoir cette ouverture. C'est certain, si votre enfant ne veut pas en parler, de dire OK, pas de problème, je comprends que tu n'es pas dans un moment où tu n'es pas disponible à en parler. Viens me voir lorsque tu es prêt à en parler, ou je vais te donner 5-10 minutes pour te calmer et je vais venir te revoir après pour avoir cette conversation. Donc, oui, c'est important d'attendre que votre enfant est dans un moment calme et disposé à avoir cette conversation, mais ne permettez pas à votre enfant d'éviter d'avoir cette conversation potentiellement difficile, parce que l'enfant va essayer d'éviter pour justement ne pas avoir le stress d'aller à l'école. Donc, de trouver l'équilibre, de trouver un moment, le bon moment et de ne pas laisser votre enfant détourner sa conversation. Donc, je vais retourner sur ce que plusieurs de mes collègues ont dit. C'est de ne pas juger votre enfant, de ne pas minimiser ce que votre enfant vit. Comme que plusieurs l'ont mentionné, l'enfant vit, sa détresse est réelle. Donc, il ne faut pas dire « Oh, ben, c'est pas grave, ça va passer. » Non, de dire « Oh, ça doit être très difficile pour toi et désolé que tu vis cette situation. » On peut même dire « Oh, lorsque moi j'étais à l'école, j'ai vécu une émotion similaire. » Et de trouver un petit niveau un milieu de comparaison par rapport à ça. Mais de toujours rester dans la posture d'écoute active. Donc, de valider, d'écouter et de comprendre qu'est-ce qui se passe. Donc, lorsque votre enfant finit de vous partager ses peurs, demandez-lui qu'est-ce qui pourrait être fait pour apaiser ce stress ou pour qu'est-ce qui doit être différent à l'école pour que l'enfant se sente en sécurité. C'est certain, si votre enfant dit « j'ai peur du COVID », bien dire « malheureusement, la COVID est ici pour un moment indéterminé ». On n'a pas le contrôle sur ça. Et peut-être dire « effectivement, moi aussi, la COVID me stresse, mais qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour contrôler nos propres comportements par rapport à cette situation difficile ?» mais d'essayer de trouver des stratégies et des solutions valides, réalistes et qui fonctionnent pour votre enfant. C'est pas facile, l'enfant va sûrement trouver des solutions qui sont pas réalistes ou qui sont exagérées, mais de comprendre, de décortiquer ces solutions pour votre enfant. Donc, de dire, oh, bien, je vais juste jamais aller à l'école, puis je ne vais pas avoir la COVID, de dire, OK, si elle est une stratégie, effectivement. Par contre, si tu es vraiment réaliste, ça va-tu en lien avec notre but commun? Puis l'enfant va éventuellement céder et dire, non, c'est pas une stratégie à long terme. Donc, pour un peu récapituler, je dirais d'offrir un environnement ouvert pour votre enfant, offrir l'écoute active, de trouver des solutions avec votre enfant, pas pour votre enfant, donc bien avec lui ou elle, et d'assurer que les solutions sont réalistes et atteignables. Je dirais aussi d'en parler avec l'équipe école. Si jamais c'est vraiment une problématique importante, c'est certain, on a des ressources disponibles. Tous les conseils scolaires sont représentés ce soir, donc ça vous montre à quel point que pour nous, les services sont importants, les élèves, on les tient à cœur. Donc, de ne pas hésiter de consulter soit votre direction ou l'enseignant titulaire de votre enfant pour obtenir l'appui nécessaire. Donc, pour la deuxième question que j'ai ce soir, c'est comment encourager mon jeune adolescent à faire ses travaux et ses devoirs quotidiennement afin d'éviter la panique et l'anxiété de dernière minute. C'est difficile de convaincre un adolescent qu'il y a un problème lorsque dans sa tête, il n'y a pas de problème. Mais Shannon a parlé brièvement de comment contrer la procrastination. Donc, souvent, une routine, de lui donner les outils justement pour être capable de faire les travaux, d'être structuré dans ses propres tâches. On a souvent tendance à dire, bon, mais au secondaire, il devrait le savoir. Mais la réalité est qu'il y en a plusieurs qui ne savent pas comment bien travailler. Donc, il ne faut pas les juger. Il faut les accompagner où ils sont. Si jamais vous êtes entièrement dépassé à comment est-ce que j'ai mon enfant faire le devoir, je ne comprends pas le devoir, c'est impossible que je leur cet appui. Les écoles ont des enseignants justement pour ça qui pourraient vous appuyer aussi. Mais je dirais aussi que si votre enfant n'est pas prêt à admettre que c'est un problème, de dire « OK, c'est correct, si tu ne le vois pas, je comprends. Par contre, lorsque tu es prêt à en parler, je suis là pour toi. » Ou de dire « OK, de contrarier un petit peu, de dire « Bien, la dernière fois que tu as eu un travail à faire, j'ai remarqué que tu avais ce gros stress. Tu veux-tu en parler? Comment est-ce qu'on peut faire autrement? » Donc, c'est un peu en lien avec la réponse à ma première question. Donc, c'est d'avoir la conversation avec l'adolescent lorsqu'ils sont disponibles, qu'ils sont aptes à répondre, à vous entendre et d'assurer que vous le faites dans un ton qui ne le juge pas, qui ne rabaisse pas son stress ou quoi que ce soit, et de lui offrir l'aide nécessaire et de reconnaître vos limites aussi. Donc, si vous n'êtes pas en mesure de l'appuyer, c'est correct. Mais vous pouvez les référer vers les services à l'école aux besoins. Donc, ça répond les questions pour moi. Merci d'avance pour la traduction simultanée. Moi, je ne serais pas capable de le faire, donc je ne l'ai pas fait, mais merci à vous.
Merci, on essaie de notre mieux. So what I'm hearing here is talk openly and make sure your kid can't escape you and escape the difficult conversation. But with that in mind, make sure that you're having that conversation when they're calm and in a private space, and not when you're in a state of distress or when your own anxiety is flaring up. Don't interrupt like an activity like a game or something like that, that you really want to make sure that they're in a chill space, that you're in a chill space, and this doesn't have to be a threatening conversation. I usually joke about like the car ride where like you're able to be driving the car and you're talking to them, but it's not like you're like looking at them, staring at them, and like all that's happening right now is eye contact. Reassure them and explain that you're here to help. Don't make it seem like it's punishment, and be open if they just want to talk or if they don't want to talk. Wait until they're ready, but don't let them like escape the conversation, which I think is where there's like a balancing act going on there. So you have to like kind of play it by ear to be like, you're trying to run away from this, so we're going to talk now, but also we want to make sure that we're not forcing you to talk. So like find that cozy middle ground. A lot of the time they will try to avoid the situation, so try and find that balance. Don't underestimate or minimize or invalidate their response or their stress or the problem itself. Especially as adults, like we can't compare necessarily to that. And I'm young enough that I can remember when people would do that and I'd be like, no, it's not the same, the world is ending. So try to avoid those kinds of pieces because it is very relative. Try to make it concrete. So ask them what can be done or what could be different for them to feel safer and more cozy and comfortable. And offer just an open environment as best as you can. And I think that really is what we're hearing consistently tonight, is creating a space where your kid and you can chat about things. Even if it's like stupid things, like I think those one-on-one conversations between a parent and their kid are things that we don't take enough time to think about and to make time and space for, because that makes a big difference. And I'm going to pass it on to Reem. We are nearing our ending this evening. So this is our last panelist question. We have received a few questions from the audience. And so what we'll do when we get to that point is I'm going to give this like it's going to be a rapid fire round where I will read out a question. The first panelist to start talking gets to respond. And then we move on to the next one within 30 seconds, because I am acknowledging that it is almost 8:30 and y'all have probably got kids to put to bed soon, and or you need to cook dinner. And if you're like myself, you haven't thought of what you're eating for dinner yet. So you got to get to that point. But I'll pass it back to Reem so she can ask the last question.
Okay, thanks, Faye. So the next question is for Sarah, actually. And Sarah, so what are some practical coping strategies, in your opinion, that young people and children can use to cope with their anxiety, both at home and at school?
Thanks, Reem. And going off of what Faye mentioned, I'll try to make it as quick as I can. But I do really love this question because I think the practical takeaway is really important. And in my experience with children and youth, having that practical thing that they know what to do, they know how to do it and can access it is very helpful for even just thinking ahead of, if I feel anxious, okay, I know something that I can try. May not always work, but I have an idea of what to kind of do. And before jumping in, I also want to acknowledge that, coping skills and coping mechanisms can be very different for every person. So it often does require a little bit of trial and error before we figure out what's going to work for me. So if you try some of those general suggested ideas with your children and youth and they don't seem to be working, that's okay. There are also different options you can try. So I'll go over a couple of my favorite ones that I seem to think generally work, but again, they may not always hit home, but some things that seem to have worked in my experience. So it's a very common classic one you may have heard before, called kind of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And so basically this way that you can utilize it is it's typically used for using the 5 senses. And it's used as a grounding technique to, especially if we're feeling really overwhelmed or, having a really hard time kind of even just bringing ourselves down, really having breathing issues. It can help us to kind of remind us of the space that we're in, especially if our thoughts get really racing. And for children and youth, that can be really helpful. And I find that they kind of like to use this because in some ways it feels a little bit like a game. So the purpose of it is you would use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you'd start with asking your child, or they can do it themselves, to look around the room and find 5 things that they can see in the room. And then moving on to 4 things that they can hear, 3 things that they think you could touch would either be soft, squishy, hard, have some kind of feeling to it. 2 things that they could maybe smell that's in the room, and 1 thing that might have some kind of taste or flavor to it. If you wanted to kind of extend it and make this longer, some people do 5 of each. So 5 things that I can see, smell, touch, taste, and hear, and then moving down to 4 things I can see, smell, touch, taste, and hear. And again, it's really helpful. I also find that with children, especially maybe a little bit younger children, using colors can be really, really beneficial instead. That's also really helpful for them to remember if they're at school. So if they want to utilize it at school, instead of trying to remember, like, you know, what are those senses, what are those things that I'm supposed to be looking for, especially when I'm feeling really maybe overwhelmed or feeling anxious, trying to look for those colors. So maybe if I can look for 5 things in the room that are red, 4 things that are green, 3 things that are yellow, 2 things that are purple, and 1 thing that's pink. That can be helpful for them, especially when they're at school. They may be able to remember that a little bit easier. If they're at school too, and they don't want to be somebody that's like looking around the room or have to answer about why they're doing that, or if there's maybe some older children and youth, if they're taking a test and that's when the stress comes on, I sometimes encourage children and youth to try to think about a room that they feel really familiar and comfortable with. Can I actually picture what that space looks like? And from that memory, can I start thinking about the different colors and things that are in that room? And then I can kind of, you know, remind myself, bring myself down. It doesn't necessarily work as much for the grounding because you're not in that physical space, but it is that distracting piece where I'm now taking my mind off of, you know, the panic or the stress, anxiety, that the situation that I'm in, and I'm kind of focusing on to something else. A couple people have mentioned breathing before, which I find is either hit or miss with people, adults as well as children. But I do think that we can sometimes get a little bit more of a beneficial use of breathing with children when we try to make it a little bit more fun and exciting. So one way that I often use is, you know, often we talk about breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And if you just kind of try and sit and do that with a kid, sometimes you'll maybe get 1 breath in, 1 breath out, and then, you know, distracted by something else. So I like to try to make it a little bit more exciting, thinking about, like, you know, when you make cookies and it smells so good, so pretend that you're smelling in those cookies for 4 seconds, and then you want to eat the cookie, but it's too hot, so you're like cooling off the cookie by breathing out through your mouth. So trying to make it an exciting experience, or trying to do things like superhero breathing. So if you can, you know, kind of stand in a stance like this while you breathe in and then exhale with your arm out, and you know, it's, again, it's a little bit of that distracting because I don't feel like I'm just sitting here and breathing, but it's also kind of helping me in the like physiological sense of actually being able to calm myself down. Some other things that are kind of similar like that with children they could do at school too is starting to kind of go through the alphabet and name animals that start with the letter of the alphabet. So again, it's that kind of distracting technique. So if you could start thinking like, okay, A, what's an animal? Alligator. B, there's a bear. C, there's a cat, and working their way kind of as far as they can go down. You know, sometimes it's maybe saying you don't have to go through the whole alphabet because that might feel stressful for them if they can't think of, you know, different animals for every letter. But that could be another helpful way of kind of that distracting piece. There's lots of things that you can make as well with kids and children and youth for crafts. So you can make like a glitter jar. There's lots of instructions online if you just kind of Google like a glitter jar for mindfulness. The KMFRC right now, actually, we're handing out kind of kits to create a mindfulness jar. So you could just fill it up with, they have the instructions online of like certain amount of glue and water and glitter and beads and anything you can put in it. And then moving it up and down where it slowly moves from the top to the bottom can be really helpful for children to kind of just focus on that and bring themselves down a little bit. What I like for the kind of older children and youth as well is sometimes looking at a little bit of that gratitude. So if we're feeling like starting to feel really anxious, like I'm really worried that those thoughts start racing, those negative thoughts, automatic thoughts, nobody likes me, really trying to focus on what are the things in my life that are positive. And that you can do that with parents as well, mom or dad, or whoever is, you know, kind of the closest person to them. We can have that conversation maybe at the end of the day, or if I want to do it by myself, if you're older, older, maybe a teen, writing those things down, maybe like 5 things from the day that I'm grateful for or positive for. And the days that it's harder to find those things are often the days that we maybe more so need to do them. So they can be the smallest things. It could be, I was really, really thirsty at lunch that day, and that water bottle that I had was so refreshing. That's something I'm super grateful for today. That was a really positive thing for me. So trying to find those kind of smaller things that you can pick up. And then also just having conversations with kids about what makes them feel better. I think for a lot of us as clinicians, that's kind of the starting base that we go off of when talking to kids about trying to figure out what their coping skills will work best for them, is how do you feel better? Like, do you like to color and draw? Does that make you feel good? Like when you listen to music, does that make you feel good? When you talk to other people, does that make you feel good? And then when going to school, kind of try and plan with them ahead of time. Okay, if I start to feel, those butterflies in my stomach, or I start to have a hard time breathing, what am I going to be doing? Like you can even write out a list of the coping skills, or write out the things that they can kind of refer back to if they need to. I know a couple people mentioned that before. And then as David also mentioned, and some other people did, is practicing these skills and these coping mechanisms when they're not feeling the most anxious, right? So maybe taking time when you're just having dinner, oh, let's look around the room. What are 5 things in this room that are green, or something like that? Or even showing them in a way of how it can work, in terms of sometimes getting kids, running around and getting their heart racing up, and then practicing that breathing and kind of showing them how the breath actually brings your heart rate down and kind of calms you down a little bit, can be helpful for them as well. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on is that David did bring up one mental health app that I think is really great for, especially again, those older, maybe teens or some youth. The Mind Shift app is really good. And there are 2 others that I'm a big fan of, is Mood Mission and Happify. They are all free apps, but they sometimes, some of them have like options where you can pay for more of like premium things, but the free things that they do have within the apps are still really helpful. So for the Mood Mission, you kind of go and you complete different missions, and that can be, trying out different coping skills, and can be a good way to trying to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, so we have now concluded our first stage. We now have 3 more hours of phenomenal content ready for you. By which I mean we are now moving into our rapid fire Q&A based off audience submissions. Nobody laughed when I made that joke, so I'm just gonna move on quickly. But I do wanna point out a couple shout outs to the person named Double Double, the person named Anani Mouse, and I think there was one more, Soccer Mom.
I was about to say the exact same thing. Congrats to you guys for your creative names. I think they won the coffees, Faye.
I think you all won the coffee. Everyone who wants a double-double, just message the person with that name and you'll be good to go. So I am going to actually literally time the next 3 questions, because I do want to have a couple moments for a wrap up. And so maybe panelists, just the first one to speak, you take it away. So we have 3 questions. The first one is, any tips for managing separation anxiety for a split family household with children with special needs who struggles with anxiety management? Who would like to take it away? Okay, everyone is scared.
Yeah, I'll take it away.
You have 30 seconds. Go.
I'll take some of it. Best thing to do is ask yourself, what situations make it worse, or what situations are you completely avoiding? One of those things too is, often with a kid of separation anxiety, kind of like OCD, the parents are often doing extra things. So it's time to, take stock of what extra thing am I doing as a parent, and how are we going to phase that or stop that out? We're going to practice being brave in situations that are gradually increasingly harder and harder for the child, and giving them a high five for their efforts and that sort of thing. Often to reduce this in the long term, that's how we would go, is we'd make a list of those situations, and then we would just practice being in those situations.
Wow, David, you beat my timer. Thank you so much. And I apologize. I hope you still like me. My second question is, we have a young person who had a really hard time attending school in person before COVID, who is now living their best life and thriving while staying at home. How can we help this person's return to school after a whole year living their best life at home without their anxiety, taking off and going to space in some unpleasant ways? Who would like to take it away?
I can take it away. I'm actually working with a youth who's going through the exact same thing. So one thing that we've been doing is to encourage her to go to class through Google Meets. And so she's not physically at school, but she's still attending school and she's not missing any work. But we've also had like a little reinforcement system. So with the help of the teachers, we're able to motivate her by making her teachers embarrass themselves in front of the whole class. So one of them has to dress up as Professor Snape, or they have to sing opera or things like that. So that's one way that I'm motivating her to go to school.
Awesome. I am so sorry, folks. In a moment, I will share where you can all get more info and access to additional resources, because I acknowledge that this is probably not enough time for folks to get all of the info that they need. My last question is that we have reports from parents that some of their children's teachers have been expressing their own fears and anxieties to the children in the classroom, which I imagine then those renders those children and young folks even more anxious themselves. So how do we manage that without being negative or against the teacher, who we know is putting their life on the line and doing everything that they can in these times? Who would like to take that one away?
I can touch on it, I guess. I think without knowing, where the teacher's coming from, if it's intentional or if it's more kind of just coming out, I think a big piece of it could possibly be, that validation, trying to, in a sense, the word that we don't like to use, the normalize anxiety, and that, everybody may be feeling a little bit uncomfortable or maybe not feeling really sure about what things are going to look like. And so the fact that they're sharing that may be, a reason to trying to make everybody feel like they're not alone in those feelings. And so, if the teacher's sharing that, that's increasing, your concern, like that's okay. And that talking about, let's try and make a plan about how we can help reduce that so that it doesn't maybe get increased when you're at school.
Y'all are superstars. I am so sorry, because I can see the anxiety in your eyes when you see me getting closer to zero. And so this is a lesson that we all have to be the best models we can, because all of us struggle with anxiety. I do want to just share one quick thing that I thought was cute, because somebody was speaking a moment ago. And if you can see this, this is one of my favorite visuals from a recent project of ours that counts down the things that you can see, things you can touch, the things that you can hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which might be useful for folks. I just realized you can see everything in my background now. Okay, so we are now at the end of our time this evening. I do want to give a really big heartfelt shout out to all of our panelists for putting up with my counting down from 10 to 0, B, for just sharing so much this evening. I think that we've heard a lot of phenomenal tips, tricks, and practical solutions, stuff that families, children, and young folks and parents are struggling with right now. And y'all have been the most phenomenal set of people to moderate. I also want to give a shout out to our audience members who have attended and hopefully taken a lot of valuable things away from this conversation this evening. I do want to give a shout out to Lynn and her team for making this event happen and for pulling this whole thing together. For all of y'all for just doing the great work that you're doing in the schools and communities across Kingston and the broader Kingston area, as well as a shout out to Reem for jumping into this with me and co-hosting this evening. I don't think I have much else to share except following this, we will do our best to connect with our participants to make sure that you all know what resources are available to you, where to go. And I would say that there are tons of organizations in the Kingston area who can address any questions that might have come up for you that we didn't have a chance to dive into this evening. I do now acknowledge that we are at 8:39, and I don't know if any of y'all expected us to be going for an hour and 40 minutes. And so I hope on this note, we can wrap it up. I will pause for a moment to see if Lynn has any final thoughts to share.
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody and thank you, Faye and Reem. I really appreciate the work you did tonight. It was wonderful, and I hope that the audience I'm sure they got a lot of good value from tonight. And also, if I could ask the panelists to maybe share whatever slides or information you were showing tonight so that we can make them available on our website for the audience as well. I've had some requests about that.
Awesome. So we'll probably touch base with the panelists on our end and then hopefully push everything out to our wonderful, wonderful participants. Without anything further, again, thank you, David, Megan, Shannon, Thomas, Sarah, Jacqueline, Jillian, Carol, Mona Lise, Lee, and of course, Reem. And of course, always a shout out to our tech person, Terry, for being there and putting up with my constant messages throughout this evening. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we will be in touch quite soon. Goodbye, everybody.